Timeless. Enchant an ally to appear out of sync with the normal flow of time, reducing threat they generate by 30% for 35 minutes. Yo, can I play with an Augmentation Evoker? Can we get an Augmentation Evoker in the group, please? As Devastation? Because I really have some threat issues, and lo and behold, they're going to just reduce our threat by 30%. Yeah, why doesn't Devastation get this skill? So, like, move this to the class tree for sure, because this is on the wrong tree. So here's my impression of the class. So we played it for a bit. Definitely got some interesting insight into how it plays. I'd say, to me, it kind of just plays like an uptime class, right? So uptime class would be like a frost mage as like an example. Basically, you have like a short cooldown that you're trying to maintain the whole time. Only in this case, instead of it being the cooldown that like makes you stronger, it's just a cooldown that makes like everyone around you stronger too, right? So it's all about maintaining that buff, right, and keeping it rolling for your party. That seems to me like the most important thing. Now, there are some interesting things you can do with the build. I feel like Pupil of Alexstrasza, though, just feels like way better than Echoing Strike. I wasn't really a fan of Echoing Strike. These both kind of do the same thing. They both affect your builder, but the issue is, as your strike is just 10% per target hit, which is only 30%, right? But then Pupil of Alexstrasza's Fury is 100% chance to always double your Living Flame. So this one's just like always working, right? So I feel like it just feels a lot better for Essence Burst generation. And then obviously, you know, there's important stuff here, like Eruption deals more damage per enemy. This is going to be up to 5 enemies, basically, is where it kind of caps out. You can choose to go Quell or Inner Radiance. You don't have to, though, which I find kind of interesting. So you can just opt to skip that talent entirely. And of course, you're going to want these, right? Upheaval is your new Empower. This just makes it so that you hit mobs with this thing. It's just a big circle, gets bigger and bigger the more you charge it. Obviously in AoE, you would, let this grow bigger, but in single target, you just send out rank 1, kind of similar to Fire Breath. And then, yeah, so Stretch Time feels mandatory to me because we're going to be using our Deep Breath or Breath of Aeons, like a lot. Eons, actually. This is basically a AoE Touch of the Magi. You can think of it that way. And this also gives us our buff, which is Ebon Might. This is basically our version of Dragon Rage. It's a 30-second cooldown, so it's super short, but it gives us a damage increase, and it gives all of our allies an increase as well. Basically, it scales up their intellect, or agility, or strength, whatever primary stat they have. Another thing about this is you can extend it, so you can just keep this thing rolling. But it itself is a 1.5 second cast, which means you actually have to cast it to apply it. It's much better if you can just like keep this rolling and not reapply it. You actually don't want to press this ability if you don't have to, because if you can just keep an Ebon Might up the whole time, then that means you don't ever have to waste 1.5 seconds re-upping it, right? But obviously it's going to fall off eventually because the buff only goes up to 10 seconds. You can only keep 10 seconds of this thing going, and then it falls off. So if there's ever any downtime in the fight, like, you're going to have to reapply it. One thing I do like, though, is that since it's such a short cooldown, it doesn't feel too bad to try and get it rolling again. Right? Because if it falls off, okay, whatever. I just put it back up, right? Worst case scenario, I lose it for 30 seconds. No big deal. And then moving on from there, obviously there's some talents that just feel like they're mandatory. I'd say this one is mandatory, right? Volcanism, like essence cost reduction on your spender, your only spender, right? Of course you're going to take that. Because Eruption is your only spender. You don't have Disintegrate, right? Like, this is it. So, so obviously that's pretty important, right? And then stuff like Draconic Attunements. This one's pretty interesting. I like this talent a lot. It just basically means that you have utility here. So like, if I take this talent here as well, I just give people more health whenever I press my shield, which is nuts, right? Like, you press your damage defensive, you get 20% more health. Your allies also get this 20% more health. You get more movement speed if you hover. What's really great about this is since it's tied to the actual buffs themselves, you can keep both at the same time, basically. So I find that to be pretty cool. And then obviously Plow the Future. This is just cooldown reduction on your breath move, which isn't that big of a deal. It's only 10 seconds. Pretty minor. But I do think it's the better path to Prescience. And I do think that we go this talent. Like, I'm not sure if we would ever go Symbiotic Bloom. Like, I'm not really into this talent. So yeah, I'd probably pick this one up. And then obviously Timelessness seems really, really great. You don't necessarily need this talent. This is just for if you've got another Devastation Evoker in the group, right? Because you're going to want to give them less threat. So if you play with Devastation, this one is going to be really, really awesome. Otherwise, you're probably going to want to go with Blistering Scales instead. One thing that's interesting here is Seismic Slam is a stun, right? Landslide causes enemies who are mid-air to be slammed into the ground, stunning them. So you can actually chain this with Upheaval, because Upheaval knocks stuff into the air to slam them down and stun them, right? So this is like a combo you can basically do. And I'm assuming that you'd probably want to take Forger of Mountains here to reduce the cooldown to have like a better 4-second stun or something like that. So Seismic Slam seems pretty great if you're, you know, going for like that group utility of having the extra stun. Also, obviously, if you have Terror of the Skies, right, you're stunning every single time you have Breath of Aeons, which is also happening about once every minute once you have your cooldown reduction. So that also seems pretty great. So yeah, you'll have like a lot of group utility Mythic Plus in terms of like stuns and stops and all that, right? Because we've got our you know, our Tail Swipe, we've got our Wing Buffet, we've got our Terror of the Skies stun, and now we also have our Landslide stun if we chain it with upheaval. So just like all around really, really useful stuff here. Also, I find it funny that you're like just knocking enemies into the air, right? I think that's kind of hilarious about this. But yeah, you would basically have to chain it with upheaval. By the way, this is a 40-second cooldown, but it's actually much shorter because you get cooldown reduction on this. More on that in just a little bit. But anyways, yeah, so damage reduction obviously is great, right? This is giving people our armor and it makes them take damage. I think that you probably also want to take Unwielding Domain, at least in Mythic Plus and single target, you'd probably take increased damage to the primary target. And with this one, it says it also launches them higher, which is funny. I don't think you'd want that, actually. I'm pretty sure you want this one, Mythic Plus, but obviously in Raid you would choose the Locust here. So yeah, I'm going to go with like a Mythic Plus build here, so we'll probably go with this one. And then if you're taking Blistering Scales, this is kind of a toss-up. So Molten Blood is actually insanely good. It's like a 200k absorb shield for 30 seconds based on their missing health. Lower targets get a larger shield. It seems like crazy for saving someone. But since you're kind of wanting to put this on the tank and forget about it, I think Regenerative Chitin is probably better, right? Because it regenerates over time. So you probably just have to cast it less. I could definitely see this one being like super useful though for certain situations. And then moving down the tree, we do also have some other stuff we want to look at. So this one's pretty great. Breath of Aeons, Breath of Eons grants allies a shield for 100% of its damage dealt. I didn't really notice this doing too much damage, so I'm not really sure if this would really be too great. But obviously in my tests, I wasn't like having people in Mythic Plus like hitting the target dummy. Right, so I might just skip on that one. I think I'll probably end up running here. These are pretty great, some of these, but I think I might actually run with just Imposing Presence here. And then maybe even go with the Seismic Slam talent, just one in there. This one's interesting. So as your strike reduces the remaining cooldown on your landslide by 1 second per target hit. I don't really think I want to be pressing Azure Strike though, right? Like if I can just double my Living Flame every time, like I'm just not casting Azure Strike unless I have to move. So I'm not really interested in this talent. And then, yeah, so now we're in the capstone area. This is where points get really, really tight. So obviously Hoarded Power, insane. And then Presence, we want this one, right? And all the talents to go with it. This is just like, just stats. It's just free stats. And you have a chance to get Essence Burst. And you have this thing where you just get 15% of the damage your allies deal, right? And this thing is going to last for, I mean, it lasts a while, right? So like you can actually get multiple of these out at the same time if you just keep chaining them. The duration it lasts for depends on your mastery. So the more mastery you have, the more it lasts. And it's also kind of a short cooldown, right? And there's ways we can reduce our cooldown further. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge right here. So yeah, I mean, this thing is pretty sick. I think you pretty much always want Fade Mirror with it as well. I don't really see a case where you wouldn't run this. And then obviously cooldown reduction with Time Skip is pretty awesome. This is a 3-minute cooldown and it's basically like shifting power, but just like on a whole other kind of drug, right? It's just insane. But I kind of like Interwoven Threads. I don't know. So Tomorrow Today is pretty nice, right? It just gives you 1 more second, but I feel like if I'm taking this talent, I kind of want the cooldown reduction 15%. This is just really nice to have. Although I think you can probably skip it and then you can probably go with some other options here. So, oh, number 1, Ignition Rush. Gotta have this talent. This is like a mandatory talent, right? Essence Burst reduces the cast time of Eruption by 30%. We don't have any way to make our Essence Spender faster aside from this. This is the only way, right? Like, it's not instant casts. We have to cast it. We have to sit there and cast the spell, right? So we want to be casting as low as possible. And obviously, 30% faster is a big deal. That's a huge amount of time save. And then I could also probably see us trying to pick up Fauna Magic. I feel like Fauna Magic is going to be really useful to us because you kind of want to charge your Fire Breath at full every time because Leaping Flames actually works with Pupil of Alexstrasza's and it makes your Leaping Flame like hit everything. Like your Living Flame literally just shoots everywhere and you proc like 1,000,000 Essence Bursts from it. So like basically every time your Fire Breath is up, you get just an insane amount of like Essence Burst procs from it. You pretty much always get 2 every time as long as you have this talent. So I think since I'm full charging my Fire Breath a lot, I probably want Fallen Magic. This also just obviously makes it faster to use Upheaval too, which is nice, but that's not even really the reason I want it. And then, of course, Accretion. This is pretty much mandatory in my mind. Eruption reduces the cooldown on Upheaval, right? So this goes from being a 40-second cooldown to be much, much less. Obviously, we also have the ability to make it even less with 15%. This, I think, honestly, one of the biggest things here is that whenever you run this talent, you can't really get the full use out of it just because you're like overcapping on your cooldowns. So I think it's actually more efficient to go with Interwoven Threads. I'm a big fan of this talent, although I could see myself maybe dropping it for some other stuff. So Momentum Shift is pretty nice. This is just a buff. For me, it had like 70% uptime, and it kind of like floated between 1 and 2 stacks. I usually had 2 stacks for it, but I'd say it was like, you know, 3/4 of the time I was at 2 stacks, and then 1/4 of the time I was at, you know, 1 stack while it was up for that like 70% uptime. So it seems pretty good. Also Reactive Hide, this just makes your tank damage thing go like crazy. It does a lot more damage. I could see this just being really good if it's tuned well. I don't know what the tuning is on this thing because it's kind of hard to test it, right? Like I need someone to be meleeed for this to be tested. So I don't know. It seems nice. Probably nice, right? Modes of Possibility are interesting. I was using this a bit, and I think we were seeing like around 2 per minute, around 2 procs per minute, which means around 20 seconds of cooldown reduction per minute. The usefulness of this talent greatly depends on who you're playing with, right? Because if people are picking up the motes and they don't really get anything out of it, then who cares, right? So if it's like a Frost Mage picking up motes, who cares? But if it's a Devastation Evoker picking up these motes, it's huge, right? Or like a Fire Mage, or like any other class where like your main cooldown, you'd want to get it faster, and also you'd gain a lot from using it faster, right? So like certain classes that like line up all their cooldowns wouldn't want this. It would just offset their cooldowns and it wouldn't really do much for them. But then there are other classes where they would see this and they'd be like, yo, give me that. That's insane, right? Like Devastation obviously just wants it. There's not even a question. Like you would want this for Dragon Rage no matter what. And then also we have Overlord. So this one's pretty nice. Basically, it makes it so that we just do a bunch of eruptions whenever we use our Deep Breath, which we will be using a lot. So I think this is probably the play. I'm kind of torn here. Like I feel like Fallen Magic could definitely go into Momentum Shift, but I'm not sure which one I would do. I could also just go into cooldown reduction. In fact, probably this is the best one if I had to just guess, like without really like seeing the effects here. But yeah, something probably like this. Obviously, if I'm playing with a Devastation Evoker, right, like I'm putting this talent up here because I want them to be safe, right? Like Timelessness is an ability that I feel like you should have as Devastation. For some reason, it's in this tree. I don't know why. It should be on the class tree. This should be a class talent. It should be like over here, right? Because this is such an insane ability. You just get 30% more less threat. Just 30% less threat, right? Imagine all the problems this talent would solve if we could just play this Devastation and put it on ourselves, right? Obviously, also having the cheat death would be like so insane. This is like such a sick cheat death because it also heals you and your allies whenever it procs. It's a 6-minute cooldown, right? So it's pretty good. And then we also have this one, which I'm like, oh my god, please give me this as Devastation. Like Deep Breath, basically you take 50% less damage and it staggers that damage, right? These are all talents that I feel like Devastation could really, really benefit from. The cheat death obviously is probably a little too good. But the other two I feel like are almost like necessary. Like I don't think that it makes sense to not give Stretch Time to Devastation. I don't think it really makes sense to not give Tirelessness to Devastation. These are both talents that are just like purely quality of life, and they should be on the class tree, and I do not understand why they are locked behind one specific spec when they just are like required for Devastation. Like your kit's like missing these tools, right? And like, hey, we found them. Here's where the tools went, right? Here's where they went missing. It was in the augmentation tree the whole time. So I would love for Blizzard to actually rethink this decision. I really do think that Timelessness and Stretch Time should be on the class tree. I would like to also see Defy Fate on the class tree, but I get like having the cheat death as a support class, like that kind of makes sense, I guess. You know, you're giving up damage for like more cheat deathiness or something. I don't know, but yeah. But these two though, like there's just like no excuse. Like they should definitely be on the class tree. So yeah, I'm thinking probably like a talent build like this for Mythic Plus, right? I really don't think I would ever play Echoing Strike personally. If I was going like in a raid scenario, I'd probably drop a couple of these talents. So I'd probably drop Overlord. I'd probably pick up Momentum Shift. I'd probably drop, well, maybe we'd still run Blistering Scales. I don't know. Maybe actually we would run Reactive Hide for raid. I could see that being a thing. But yeah, I think for the most part though, you're probably going to stick with Fate Mirror. I could see there being fights where you'd probably go Tomorrow Today or Interwoven Threads. It kind of probably depends on the fight, I think. Yeah, obviously we'll have to wait and see like how this actually pans out. Apparently Blizzard is adding in like some sort of new technology for being able to see like how much damage you're giving other people, some sort of way to quantify what your impact is, right? And I feel like that's super important as augmentation, because in the meta that we currently have in World of Warcraft, if people are coming in and they're seeing you on the meters and they aren't really sure what you're doing, and they just see that your damage is very low. In my test, I was doing around 40k in single target. Just for reference, my devastation spec does around 100k, right? So I'm missing about 60k. So if there's another way to quantify that 60k that's missing, people are going to see that and they're just going to immediately snap judgment, assume that your spec is bad, and like they won't really consider the benefits that you bring, right? This has been the whole problem with like a support spec the whole time, is that like, how do you quantify PI? Like you have to like know a lot about the game. It's hard. It's behind a whole other layer, right? Obscured, because you have to know what like the sims do and all this other stuff. Most players don't bother with that stuff, right? Like they download the damage meter and they just go, right? So if we had like a way to see how much damage you're providing to the team and then add that to your damage, I feel like that would be just such a much better way to like quantify this class. And I think it's required, honestly. Like I don't see this being a class that you would ever want in there if you could not immediately see what the result is. You don't want any guesswork with this kind of thing, right? And obviously it'll depend on your party too, right? Because we talked about Breath of Eons, like this thing literally is a touch of the Magi on all the enemies, and it stores the damage of the people that you're buffing, and the buff itself you can keep up 100% of the time, right? So basically it's just going to store damage for the duration, right? And it's going to pop them. And that damage, I believe, is yours. Same with Fate Mirror. I believe this damage is attributed to you. So this is already being calculated in that 40k number I gave, right? So that the missing 60k, that's a lot. That's a pretty big deficit. So we definitely have to be getting damage somewhere. Now, in terms of the actual rotation itself, I played this thing for probably around 30 minutes straight, and I got a feel for it. It definitely feels like you're not very mobile at all. Like I feel like I'm pretty much glued to the ground. I can't really move much. And I'm always looking for like an instant cast to use so I can hover, but really the only instant cast you're using is this ability here. Right, you're mainly just like hard casting. The damage seemed like pretty meh. It was, I mean, the rotation itself is kind of fun. Like I enjoy the rotation of like extending. That part's fun, at least on a target dummy. But I think as soon as you throw this class into like a Mythic Plus, the fact that you have to stand there and hard cast so much is really going to be a problem, right? And I don't really know how it's going to pan out, but I do think that like, at least with the pulls being shorter, you'd probably go into every pull with Ebb and Might up, right? And at least there's that, right? So since it has a shorter cooldown, probably have that up every pull, probably have your Breath of Aeons up like every other pull. It was like a minute cooldown with this talent down here whenever I was running it. Yeah, I think that's probably good. I mean, I don't know. I feel like you're kind of locked down like that. And I don't really like that. Like it just feels like you're not really able to move too much. Oh, since we're talking about movement, so there's also this thing. This thing's really awesome. So you bestow this stone onto your ally, and basically both of you can use this thing to teleport to each other. It's got a 1 minute cooldown, and you can travel 100 yards with it. It's basically like another rescue, but just like way better, right? This thing is awesome. And then we also have this one where we can cast while moving. This ability doesn't really get reduced by anything other than your 15% reduction down here. I didn't really find that it was all that useful. I think it's kind of neat that it buffs a priest, or like I imagine it would be a priest in most cases they would want this, but I think they would need 2 of them for their ramps, right? Because it's a 2 minute cooldown. So I don't know, like I was kind of just using it for myself to be able to run around and cast, which was nice for like 10 seconds. But I don't know. I mean, it feels like it'd be maybe impactful. I think you'd pretty much just use this for yourself, but I could see them raid being useful for like a ramping priest, just to throw it on there. And also it should be noted that this can be going 60 yards, right? So you don't have to be near the priest to use this if you're using it on the ramping priest. But yeah, overall my impression is like, I think it's interesting. I just think the rotation itself just isn't very interesting. It's kind of, I'd say it's kind of flat. Like I enjoy the uptime extension aspect of it, but I really do think that it's just going to be extremely frustrating Mythic Plus. So I'm not really sure if that's like that big of a, it's really not a draw, and it's got to be good. Like the spec has to be really good if you're bringing it in a Mythic Plus scenario, because the damage of the spec itself is bad. Like it doesn't really do much damage at all. So if you're coming into that raid, like you got to be really leaning into the support side of things, right? And how much you're buffing your allies. And even though you are keeping up, like I think for me it was like almost 1,500 int, or like primary is what I was giving people. Even though you're giving people that amount and you're giving like a ton of verse and other stuff, I could see it being like something you'd want on the super high key just so you could survive, because a lot of this stuff is really nice for survival. right? Especially Aspect's Favor with your health increase. You just give 20% more health to everyone, right? You can give the Absorb Shield to someone who's having trouble living. You could obviously, you know, do healing increase, although I think that's kind of lame. You could obviously also just give them the verse itself. The verse was really, really good. It's like 20% verse, something like that whenever I was looking at it. All this stuff is really nice, and I'm sure it'll be great, but I don't know if it's enough, and I will have to see it. Like, it's going to be in the tuning, right? Like, the tuning is going to be where this thing is basically going to live or die, but I do think that it has potential. I just really don't like the design of having to hardcast everything. The hardcasts are really getting me not into it. I need some instant cast, right? Like, if this is going to be a run around bard kind of class, like, you can't just be playing like a turret. You know what I mean? Like, it just, that does not compute for me. I need to be having some variety in my rotation and having instant cast and have the ability to actually run around, do mechanics. Cause like, you can't run around, do mechanics as this class. If you're buffing your friends as this class, you are on complete standstill duty. You have to turret. You cannot move, right? The only time you can move is if you have hover up. And the only time you can really hover without losing damage or extensions is whenever you're using an instant cast. And the only time you really use instant cast is whenever you are applying this every 10 seconds, right? Your buff. So I don't know. It just feels like you're kind of locked in, right? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's fun. I'm here for it. I like the idea. I like that it's this new thing. I want to hear more about this class. I want to see how it actually is showing up in details. Because there's just like a lot of classes that already have utility and like supporty kind of things that don't do bad damage. Like, just look at Shadow Priest. Like, look at Shadow Priest with PI. PI is huge, right? The damage you get from PI is massive. And Shadow Priest does massive damage itself. It doesn't give up anything for that damage. You know what I mean? So I just feel like there's something that's, I don't know. Maybe they just need to like tune the damage up for it. But even then, I'm not sure if the playstyle is really all that great, because it sucks like having to do AoE and single target all with the same buttons and also have those buttons be hardcast. I'm just not into the hardcasting, I guess. So yeah, I guess my verdict on this is I think it's interesting, and I'm definitely excited to see another DPS spec, but I'm not sure if the rotation is like anywhere close to as fun as Devastation. Also, I feel like some of these talents, I'm a little bit annoyed that they're stuck on this spec tree, because I feel like they should really be class talents, right? Especially Timelessness, especially Stretch Time, and Defy Fate. I could go either way on this one. If this one's stuck with Augmentation, it'd be like, that would probably make sense, but it would be nice if it was class tree. I think it'd be a little too strong for Preservation though. So probably, I'm not sure if we could justify that, but yeah, having this be like these two Stretch Time and Tirelessness talents that like should just be part of the kit, having these be locked behind one spec just feels really bad to me. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. We'll have to wait and see how this evolves, but I definitely think that the rotation needs a little bit of work. So hopefully Blizzard takes a look at it and considers some of the feedback. And hopefully y'all go on the PTR and you play it and you tell me how it is, right? And I think if we give enough feedback on this thing, maybe it can get to where it's kind of a fun thing on its own. Do you like buffing other people? Does anyone here like buffing other people? Is that something that you enjoy doing in this game? Or is it something that you would just like, you'd want to have it so that people would want you in the group, right? Like, which one is it? Is it that you like playing the supporty role, or is it that you just kind of want to get in the group and you feel like this is a way to get in there? Because I feel like there's two different kinds of thought on this, right? Like, some people love playing support. There's a whole role for it in a lot of games, right? And it's not necessarily healer, right? That's a different thing. I'm talking specifically about support, because there's such thing as like a support who doesn't heal, right? So I don't know. Me personally, like, I'm a big damage dealer guy, but like, I'm okay with the damage dealer also being the support. I feel like it needs to also deal damage, right? It needs to do damage on its own. And I'm not really getting that vibe right now from this class. I feel like maybe there's, maybe it's just a tuning thing, but yeah, doing like less than half of Devastation feels like it's off. Feels like there's just something really, really off there. And a lot of other classes already buff and they don't really have like a cost to it, right? Like I said, Shadow Priest, Kyrian Druid back in Shadowlands, Paladin with like a bunch of stuff it can do. It doesn't increase your damage, but it has a ton of utility there. So yeah, I don't know. This thing, okay, so on the topic of high keys, the fact that this class has so much like survivability that you can give your allies, I feel like it's kind of crazy. Because if it's tuned well so that you can amp your damage of your friends and like you basically equal a normal DPS, if that's where the tuning is, the amount of gains that you give the group in terms of survival, right, with the 20% more health whenever you pop your defensive, which is always going to be during whatever big mechanic everyone's trying to survive is, right? The fact that you can just throw out like 200k absorb shields that deal damage, the fact that you can, you know, have all these other benefits, making people cast while moving, or just like giving the whole group like 20% more verse, right? These are all just like huge benefits. So I could definitely see it being brought for that reason, to just like push through maybe like a numerical like wall that you would hit, right? Where you can't push through it because it's just numerically, it's just too high, right? Like on the tuning. I could see that being a thing. But otherwise, I'm not really sure about it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm excited for a new spec. As always, it's definitely fun and to consider the possibilities, right? But I'm just not really sure if this is like a playstyle I would want to play, right? Although it is interesting, I definitely give it a shot though. Like I'm gonna stay open-minded, right? And I'm gonna keep watching this as it evolves. So hopefully y'all do the same. Okay, so yeah. Anyways, we precast this into precast Living Flame into our cooldown, to our blast here, tip the scales Fire Breath, use our burst, uncap our essence, push this again into our deep breaths, into our normal rotation here. Every time I press that button, I'm like, give me essence burst. Come on, give me a fucking essence burst. Come on, man. Come on, man. I'll be good for it. Just give me one, dude. Come on. Give me essence burst. Come on. Yes. Let's fucking go. No, we didn't get proc. Maintain this buff. Yeah, so even without the crit, it's like... I'm pretty sure it's just better to have mastery. Like, crit's nice and all for that seed, for like the Titan Forge on your cooldown reduction, but... I don't know, man. Don't think I care too much. TBH. Oh, I like this new animation that they have for Tip the Scales. It's nice. Notice that that's new. Oh, we lost our buff. Oops. I have to reapply that. It's this one. It's weird that it's a cast time. I keep getting mixed up by that. It feels really weird to have that be a cast time. I don't know what it is about that. Something about having your cooldown be a cast time is weird. You definitely want to full charge that shit whenever you can. Your Fire Breath, it's so nice. I love that I'm giving like NPCs plus 1 second. You see that? Or plus intellect. Like this Silver Moon Ranger over here just got intellect. I love that Shotgun Living Flame too. It's good. The Shotgun Living Flames is probably my favorite talent so far. Unironically. Yeah, so like you don't want to press this button actually. Like this button is like something you press as like a defeat. It's like, oh no, I was defeated. I had to press the button, right? Because like ideally you just never press that button. You just keep it up on your own. And that way you don't even have to worry about it, man. Because like if you press that button, you're doing a cast time and you don't do anything. It's just idle time basically. It's like maintaining the buff is way better than pressing that button. But it's kind of hard. That's the problem. See, it just fell off. So I had to press the button. I was defeated. The goal of this spec is to not press this button as much as you can. You want to avoid pressing this button. Unless there's something I'm unaware of, I'm pretty sure it's the same. Oh my god, I'm just starved on essence right now. Oh. Okay, so sometimes RNG can just fuck you, it looks like. We're gonna press the button again. Thief. It sucks. I'm like, I'm like hardcasting for so long, like trying to find an instant GCD to hover weave during. And then by the time I get it, it's already too late. You can still like maintain it pretty well though. Like even with it being, even though I was starved there for a little bit, like my buff fell down for like just a couple globals. Wasn't that big of a deal. %24 burst. God damn. I really want a lot of these talents as devastation. Or at least I want like the interaction. So even if I need to play with an augmentation evoker, that's fine. I will say though, this spec in Mythic Plus, I think you're just going to be hard inted by movement. Like to the point where I don't even know how realistic it would be for you to play this. Because I feel like you're just going to be like literally unable to do anything. You don't have like an instant casting to use, right? Like I guess you could Azure Strike while you run around, but like, man, that's got to feel bad.